Turn off the notifications.
Good morning. Welcome to the Virtual College Fair. Thank you for joining us. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenter at any time. Your cameras and microphones are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. This is just one of many different sessions happening. Be sure to sign up for additional sessions where you sign up for this one. And this presentation being recorded will be available within a week at the same website where you registered. I will now step out of the way and turn it over to our presenter. Again, thanks for coming.
Marvelous. Good morning, or whatever appropriate time of day it is where you are. My name is Grace Fisher. I'm an Associate Dean of Admission at Reed College in beautiful Portland, Oregon. And I'm really excited today to spend a little bit of time talking about what admission counselors are looking for, what we see when we read applications. And what I hope you'll get out of this is you'll learn a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes in the admission offices of the colleges that you apply to, how they review your applications, both the things that you think about and the things that you might not have thought about. And what I hope that can do for you is help you think about when you are writing your application, how to make it the best possible representation of yourself. And I get the way I think of kind of splitting it out when you think about how your application is reviewed is there are some things that are under your control that affect the consideration of your application, and there are some things that aren't. And I think learning about that can be stressful in some ways because it's like, oh man, then I have to really work on the things that I can control, and there are these things that I can't do anything about. But hopefully eventually that can also give you a sense of peace in the sense of like, well, I will do the best I can. I will present myself the best I can. There's some things I can't do anything about, but if those things affect me, at least I did my best, which is a feeling that I tend to think feels pretty good. But there is a lot that you can do to put your best foot forward in your application. So the first thing I actually want to look at, we're going to look at, spend some time looking at a college profile to talk about what schools are looking for and how you can figure that out about the colleges that you're applying to. And then we're going to look at a sample application and talk about what it actually looks from the inside. I've got the Q&A open, so if questions come up, please pop them in the Q&A chat, and I will try to get to them. So this is somewhat small text, so let's zoom in a little bit. But today we're not working for Reed College because every college is different. So we're going to be working for as admission counselors, like try to get yourself into that mindset of an admission counselor for Jefferson University, an entirely real school. Most schools will have something called a college profile that you'll be able to find, on their website or by searching college profile or kind of institutional research, looking at the statistics for the admitted class. I find it really interesting to see how colleges talk about themselves, because what they choose to emphasize and what they choose not to emphasize can tell you about what they're looking for in their students, even if at first it all seems kind of like, blah, 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 you're a great school, I know. There's actually some little clues hidden within all of these paragraphs. So if I were, as an admission counselor for Jefferson, looking at this, some of the things I pull out, there are several places where it says Jefferson has a strong liberal arts core. It's a liberal arts institution, and students are required to complete general education requirements. So what that tells me is that this is a school that's looking for well-rounded students, students who, doesn't mean they have to love every subject, but are going to be able to handle college-level work in subjects across the curriculum. So students will need to show that in their coursework in high school so that I know that if we admit them to our university, they can succeed. That's kind of one of the number one things a college is looking for, is basically, is this a student who's shown that they're academically prepared to do well here? So we'll be looking for students who are prepared to do well across the curriculum. Another thing I notice in this profile is where university, this with this sentence, a highly successful capital campaign, that's raising money, has resulted in brand new athletic facilities, renovated dorms, and a completely new museum of art on campus. Where a college spends its money tells you about where its priorities are and maybe how it wants to grow. So this might be a college that's looking to expand its arts programs, looking to expand its athletics programs. And if they build a new dorm, maybe they're looking to sort of reconsolidate student life on campus. So that's all interesting. That might tell us a little bit about the kinds of students we're looking for. Students are guaranteed housing for 4 years because of the new dorm. So, and it's a highly residential campus. So when you're looking at schools that are highly residential, what that often indicates for the school is that they're really interested in thinking about, they hopefully are interested in thinking about who are we bringing into our community? Who's going to be a good community member? Who's going to contribute to student life, not just sort of passing through it and letting student life happen around them, but who's going to be an active part of making the college environment better for the people around them. And that's something that we'll be able to see in different parts of people's applications. But that gives you a sense that that might be something that they're looking for at this school. We see it's athletic again. And here we see information about the entering class. About 1 in 3 students are admitted. Very interesting public-private gap. 55% of students are from private schools. That's kind of unusual. If they say they're interested in enrolling a diverse class, so maybe that's something that they're looking to address. Interviews not required, but highly recommended. That tells me that this is a school that pays attention to how interested students are in them in the admission process. And then we see how students sort of academically break down. An average GPA of 3.6. Middle 50%, if you're not familiar with this measure, a mid 50% is where you say you cut off the bottom 25% of scores and the top 25% of scores, and you say half of the students' test scores fall in this range. So these students are testing quite well, 28 to 32. Now, this, of course, profile was written before the modern moment, so we don't know whether Jefferson has gone test optional or not. Let's assume that they're being humane and going test optional, and we'll see how we read applications in light of that. We also see that more than 50% of students are in the top 40% of their class. Quintile is breaking a class up in 20%. So students here are academically very strong. So we'll definitely be looking for that in our applicants. The other thing beyond the college profile that can help you understand a little bit about what a school might be looking for, what you might choose to emphasize then in your application. There's going to be other things that affect your application that you might not even see. You know, if I'm the dean of admission of Jefferson, I'm meeting with the people above me who are governing the university, and maybe they call me into a meeting one day and they're like, hey, just so you know, our biology professor got this amazing multi-million-dollar grant and for his research, and we're going to be really going hard on biochemistry and bioengineering majors because you know, we really want to prioritize this grant, this lab on campus. Or maybe we have a very competitive music program and it's like, hey, we're out of cellists, so you got any cellists, send them our way. Stuff like that might be happening, and that's something that you can't know. So why do I tell you? Because I think it can be useful to sort of think of the college process as you do the best in the realms that you can. You put your best forward. You feel as good as you can about what you have to give. And sometimes it still might not work out. Sometimes colleges have other priorities. But I think you can feel good about your application if you're feeling like this is a document that represents me. And other colleges will say, you play the euphonium. That's exactly what we want this year. So The next thing I want to show is a sample application. This is a little bit outdated, mostly because the Common App is now blue. So, they're really making big changes there, away from the maroon. But this is pretty similar to what your Common application will look like when it shows up on my computer screen. So we're just going to go through it and see that. And actually, when you fill out the Common App, you can sort of preview what yours looks like. So I would recommend doing that, kind of read it front to back, see, assuming you're applying to a Common Application school, see how it reads. But what we're going to do is go through these different elements. I'll talk a little bit about what I, as an admission counselor, kind of see or get out of them, and what my process is as I read, to try to understand a student and their circumstances and how they might contribute or fit with what we're looking for. So here we see Rachel. Rachel is from the Seattle area, it looks like. She's a white Jewish student, speaks English, did request a fee waiver. One thing that we are interested in is students' family backgrounds, their family's circumstances, and that includes economic circumstances. What kind of resources did they grow up having access to, and how did they make use of those resources? Or what resources did they maybe not have, and were they able to find substitutions, or does that, a lack of resources help us understand the rest of their application? Is it some useful contextual information? The next page will have information about a student's family. So we see that Rachel lives in a single parent home. Her mother didn't go to college, doesn't know another parent. So that tells me that Rachel's what's called a first generation college student. And so already I'm thinking, I'm sort of starting to build a picture of Rachel in my head. This is a student who maybe didn't have someone at home who had gone through this whole rigmarole before. Now, obviously, college apps are different now than they were when many people's parents were going to college. But just knowing how to navigate that kind of space, growing up with the expectation that a person will go to college, that can be a difference between students who are first in family and students who are not. So I'm just trying to get some ideas. Interestingly, though, we do see that Sarah's brother got a bachelor's at Jefferson University. So that's kind of interesting to me. Maybe her mom didn't get a degree, but it seems like education has been a priority in this family. And I'll be interested to see whether, kind of what she sees as the match between her and Jefferson, and whether her brother has anything to do with it. The next page of your application will have information about your school that you fill in. A lot of many other colleges will also require other documents called the school report. They'll require a transcript. So we'll get this information elsewhere often, but it's useful to see what the students report, and especially like reporting current year courses, because not all transcripts will say what you're taking during the current year. So I'm seeing she's taking a couple of AP classes, some honors, looking like a broad curriculum. In her senior year, she's taking 5 academic courses, which selective colleges like to see, and they're spread across the curriculum.
Hey, Grace, sorry to jump in here.
Folks can't see?
Yeah, it was on the small part of the screen. I should have caught that a little earlier. I thought that's what you were talking about. There you go. Now we can see.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
sure.
I've never encountered that screen sharing issue before. Well,
now we can see the whole thing, though. We can see the whole document.
Okay. So we saw there was page 1. Here's page 2. There's not a lot on it. So we were just talking about her parents, and then here's page 3. So thanks so much. Sorry for the error. I'm usually such a screen sharing pro. I don't know how I messed that one up. We also see here that she's ranked really highly in her class, 14th out of 548, and that's a weighted rank. So she's quite a competitive student in her school, which is good to know. one thing that we all have to do as admission counselors is figure out what does a student's academic achievement mean in the context of their school. Are they taking the hardest classes available to them? Sometimes that's very obvious, sometimes it's not. Rank is just one tool that we might use. Now, a lot of high schools don't rank anymore, so if we don't have that tool, it's not a problem for the student. It's just like, oh, I don't have that piece of information. Okay, I'll try to get information about the student's academic preparedness somewhere else. But we do have that information, and it looks like she's doing a pretty awesome job. We see she's very involved in theater too. So next page, we will see what a student reports as their test scores. And looks like she's coming in at a 23. So that's the first thing where I'm seeing like, okay, that's different than half of the student. Half the students we admit are between 28 and 32. So that's a little bit lower. So when I see that, and I think this is the way a lot of admission counselors are thinking, it's not like, oh, she's below our usual number, I'm not going to admit her. It's like, okay, I'm going to be looking through her application, and I'm going to be looking to to sort of find reasons to say, this is going to be one of those students who's below profile, but I'm still really excited about her. I'm excited enough to still advocate for her in front of my peers. And the other thing is, if she had taken these classes, these tests during Corona times, I might have just been like, well, 23 is below profile, but this is a weird year, so who knows how we feel about that. Next up is the activities list. And when you're looking at an activities list, what I'm kind of hunting for is, how does a student spend their time outside of class? Who do they spend it with? What do they care about? What do they care so much about that they invest time into? And that helps me get an idea of what are they going to do at my college? How are they going to contribute? I think a lot of times the college application can feel like jumping through, like you're ticking boxes, you're trying to jump through hoops to prove that you're the most deserving or worthy. And that's not how I read an application. Does this person deserve admission? Rather, I'm trying to build a picture of you in my head and figure out like, okay, what do they care about? When they care about something, what do they do with that caring? So I'm interested to see what she does with her time. And right off the bat, I see a lot of activities that are 9 through 12. That's awesome. Now, obviously, in the current moment, if you're a swimmer and you couldn't swim last year, we get it. That seems like a dangerous thing to be doing, getting in a pool with other people. But so we will be very understanding of interruptions of how you normally spend your time. But in this case, I'm seeing a student who, wow, when she gets into something, she really sticks with it. That's really cool. That commitment is good to see. She's clearly very involved in performing arts, music, theater, things like that. And I do note that she started something. Now, this isn't to say that everyone should go out and found a club just so they can say that they founded a club on their college applications, because it's not founding a club isn't necessarily like that box that you're trying to tick, right? What I see here is this is a student who has a passion. She's really passionate about music, and she said, I want to do something with that feeling. I want to share that with other people. And so she founded a group that brings that love of hers to other people. That's really cool. I also really appreciate all of her activity descriptions because she's telling me what she does, not just focusing on the title, but what she does with that position. And that's something that I think a lot of students miss when they're doing this section of their application, is focusing on, I was the president of NHS. Well, there's usually at least one at every high school. Instead, what I want to know is, what did you do with that power, right? And maybe you just presided over meetings once a week and that's it. Well, that's not that exciting, but and then I'm just like, president of NHS. Okay, cool. But I get really excited when someone says, I was the president of NHS, National Honor Society. I'm breaking my own rules about acronyms. And I started a fund drive that raised $5,000 for a local food pantry. Then I'm like, oh, wow, okay. This is a person where when they're in a position of leadership, they make things happen. I want that on my campus. I want people who make things happen. That's really cool. So spell out what your positions, this is the advice part of this. Spell out what you do in your clubs, in your activities, in your positions. Spell out the difference that you make. And also do, at least the first time you use any acronym, spell out what that acronym means, because it might be everyone at your high school knows what HOSA is. I didn't until I Googled it, because it wasn't a thing at my high school. Health Occupation Students of America, I think. So help us to help you, help us to get to know you, and make sure you spell out your acronyms. We've got a question. What if you got in? Yeah. So what if your activities were interrupted, and you're wondering about how to do the weeks per year thing? I think it is perfectly fine to put with something like, if in a normal year you would swim 48 weeks a year, and this last year, swimming was canceled. I think it is perfectly fine and honest to put the number of hours that you that you normally did something and generally intend to do something, except for coronavirus. I wouldn't see that as disingenuous. I would see it as like, I'm a committed swimmer. I did this 48 weeks a year for the first 2 years, and I'll just assume that that's what you intended to do during your junior year as well. We're not looking for reasons to be mad at you or reasons to catch you out or anything like that. We're looking for reasons to admit you. This is another thing I hope students will come away from this with. We spend a lot of time reading your application in schools like mine that do contextual review and holistic review. We spend a lot of time trying to get to know you. And that's because we do this job because we actually like students. We think it's really fun and enjoyable to get to know you. It's part of the pleasure of this job. And so we look for the best in you and assume the best of you. Hope that answers your question. One other thing I want to point out here, and then I'll get to the next question, is I see a lot of paid work from this student. In the breaks, working for her temple, self-employed, performing music at parties, working as an office assistant. So combined with what I already know about this student's economic circumstances, this is a student who's had to hustle quite a bit. This is probably how she's getting any spending money that she has. Maybe she's helping her mom out with bills and things like that. So I say this because I think for some folks, traditional activities like a sports team or theater or whatever, they may or may not be available where you are, where you live. They may or may not be possible depending on your other commitments. I don't see that when I see a student whose schedule is full of, caring for a sibling or an elderly relative, or their schedule is focused on work. Sure, I might not know what clubs you'll get into when you're at my school, but I see that and I see, wow, this is a person who feels a strong sense of responsibility to the people around them, who will spend their free time, whether motivated by fun or by economic necessity, but they'll spend their time outside of school, helping the people around them. That's quite laudable too. That tells me a lot about a person's character and work ethic and community contributions as well. If someone spends a huge amount of time or a decent amount of time outside of class caring for an older relative, yeah, I don't know what club you'll be in, but you'll probably be a great, person to be around, a great roommate, right? Knowing how to deal with younger siblings, how to deal with difficult people, I say as an older sibling. So I stress that because I want to make it clear that when we're seeking to get to know you, that means the whole you, that means all of your circumstances, and that means not privileging any sorts of activities over others. And relatedly, there's a question about what if the activities available are not necessarily in your areas of interest? Maybe you're in a rural area and your school doesn't have science activities, even though that's your interest. I think that's perfectly fine. And I think there are ways to make clear your interest in sciences. Maybe it's through having a science teacher write your letters of recommendation. Maybe it's something that you write your essay about. Maybe you can't figure out where else to put it in your application. Well, there's a wonderful section in the application called the additional information section, which is just a big old text box that you can fill with whatever you like. And that's a great place to say, hey, I am super, super passionate about sciences. I intend to study them, and I want to study this kind, and I want to do this kind of research. While in my community that wasn't available, I'm really looking forward to it in college. So it can be as simple as that. But I also know I used to read applications in Washington, and I would read, the applications would look pretty different from students in the Seattle area and students from rural coastal areas or rural central Washington. So we also get to get used to knowing, oh, I know this town, I know what people do there, and I know what may or may not have been available to the student. And actually it brings up something that might be useful to know. At most colleges, especially more selective colleges, they'll have area admission counselors or regional admission counselors whose whole job is to get to know your particular state or subsection of a state, and to get to know all the schools in that area. So we become experts. A little rural Idaho high school, I will know, like, oh, these are the classes that people take at this high school. These are the common activities, because I've seen applications from it several times. And if there's a school that I don't know, I research it. That's part of my job, getting to know everyone's context. So we really try to ensure that we are treating people not exactly the same, because people aren't the same. People have different circumstances, but rather treating people the same in that we seek to understand everyone's context and then understand their application within that context. But I want to move on. I hope that answered your question, Jennifer. I want to move on and look a little bit at an essay. So I know that, again, the text might be a little bit small. I'll try to get it as readable as I can. Just going to give us a couple minutes to skim this essay. So I know waiting to read something while it's on screen is kind of boring. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about this. And that's about how long it takes me to read an essay. We get to be pretty quick at these things. What I pull out from this essay is clearly this is a student for whom music is very important. We'd already started guessing that from her activities, but she's making it very clear here, music and performance. And what I think is effective about this essay is it's going from the simple statement of, I love this thing, and answering the next question that I inevitably have, which is, why do you love this thing? What do you do with this love for this thing? And I don't, I'm not left wondering. I get the answer to my question. She loves music because of the role it's played in her life, and it's a really important way for her to connect with others. So again, when I'm thinking about a student as part of a community, I'm seeing like, oh, this is a student, this is who does think about the people around her, and one of the ways that she connects with them is through music. The other thing I really respond well to in her essay is talking about the fact that she started this group and actually selected 2 other students to keep it going after she graduates, which I think is quite notable because it shows that she's thinking about, having an impact, not just having an impact and doing a thing while she's there, but we got something good going on here. How do we keep it going? So thinking about kind of legacy, thinking about her impact beyond her own individual self, I see as a marker of a really thoughtful student. And I respond well to that. I'll talk a little bit more about essays in a moment, but I got another question. Someone told me that there would be multiple admission officers reviewing your application so as to avoid bias. Is this true? Yes, most colleges will have at least 2 people, certainly most selective colleges will have at least 2 people who read your application. And it's in part to avoid bias. It's in part also just because different people see different things. I might read this essay and think, oh, I really like this. I respond well to this. Another person might read this essay and be like, I don't know, the way she talks about nursing homes kind of makes me feel like it doesn't feel so respectful to me. I didn't read it that way. The other person might read it that way. Then we can have a conversation about how important is that, and does that change our decision making? So it's 2 different readers means 2 different perspectives, and that's really important. I also think a lot of us, we're really trained when it comes to bias. We're really trained to and spend a lot of time thinking about both mitigating our biases and also recognizing that we all have biases. It's kind of inevitable, both positive, like I see this thing and I like it because it reminds me of myself maybe, as well as negative biases. And so we also, sometimes there'll be biases that I know are affecting me. And so instead of pretending I don't have it, I'll just be like, I'm a sucker for kids who did constitutional team because I did constitution team in high school. And then I will spotlight that. So the other reader will know to take that with a grain of salt. And I'll also try to make sure when I'm reading the application that I'm not making a decision, yes or no, purely based on, well, I like constitution team, so we're going to admit this student. Because if we had a class of only people who did constitution team, that would be a really boring group of people because they're homogeneous, not because there's anything wrong with constitution team. Again, I had a great time. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit more about school context, and I'm going to talk a little bit about letters of recommendation. And then we'll talk about final decisions. So we get a lot of information about your school, I was saying, and some of the things we pay most attention to are what percent of people go to college and what kinds of colleges they go to, what's often called a school's college-going culture. And what kind of rigorous coursework is offered at a student's school and how they do in it. So this was a student we saw earlier in her senior year. She's taking 2 AP classes. For some of you, that might seem like, wow, that's a lot, that's solid. For others of you, it might be like, well, I'm taking 4 AP classes. Every school is different. This is a school that only has 5. So 2 out of 5 in her senior year, like that's pretty solid. We're not expecting students to take every AP class because scheduling conflicts, and also you guys are human beings with lives. But it is good to see, we're trying to figure out of what was available to the student, what did they take advantage of? Whether that's AP, IB, honors, dual enrollment, how hard are they pushing themselves, and how are they doing in that rigor? We're also seeing that this is a school where less than half of people go to a 4-year college. combining that with our knowledge that this is a first generation college student, I'm sort of like, oh, that's, she's looking a little bit beyond what might be normal at her school. Bunch of boxes that don't mean a whole lot. College counselor says her curriculum is very demanding, but not the most demanding. So I often, if I am having trouble getting a sense of how rigorous a student's curriculum is, I'll look at what the counselor says about it, because this is filled out by the counselor. And then we get to recommendations. Now, recommendations this year are going to be a little bit different, we realize, because a lot of students, maybe this and last spring would have been the time when you met with your college counselor and got to talk about your dreams and ambitions. And this year, those recommendations might be a little bit less detailed because you didn't have that preparation time. That's not on you. We're not going to hold that against you. We know it was a wild time on the college side as well as the high school side. That said, I think if you are going to be asking any people for recommendations, since they may not have gotten a chance to get to know you in kind of that casual classroom, casual encounter in the hallways, meeting setting, it's never the wrong thing to say, like when you're asking them to write you a letter of recommendation, to mention, hey, I was really proud of XYZ thing, so I'd love it if you could mention that. Or whatever, if there's anything in particular, if there's any particular reason why you're asking that teacher, or if there's anything about your counselor might not know about you that you think that they should mention, it's okay to tell them that. Now, when it comes to reading recommendations, I sort of see them as adding color and filling in some of the gaps that might not be filled in by the rest of the application. So far, I know a lot about what matters to the student both inside and outside the classroom in terms of arts and music. I know a little bit about her family. What I don't know yet is about her in the classroom. So we're seeing from the counselor actually pulls in praise from her teachers. Teachers seem to really like her. One of the most conscientious and hardworking. Does extra work to be prepared for tests. That's awesome. Wow, lots of writing. This counselor really loves her. And then we get to the transcript. Now, every transcript looks different. Some of them are harder to read than others. But when I'm seeing this transcript, I'm seeing a student who's mostly an A student, let's say 60-30 A's and B's. Got a C in chemistry, but pulled it up, always a good sign. There's no real pattern. Like, I'm reading this very quickly because I'm used to this. Sometimes it'll be interesting to see, is there a pattern? Is there a particular kind of class where a student doesn't do well? But it seems like she's pretty evenly spread. There's no glaring subject area where she, never does well. The sciences aren't necessarily her strongest suit, but she keeps them on her schedule, which is good to see. And when she starts taking AP classes, she doesn't get all A's in them, but she pulls up a B to an A. She's making B pluses in them. So when she takes on more rigorous coursework, she's not falling apart. She's doing quite well. That's great to see. Based on what I'm seeing here, based on our college profile that said that the average student has a 3.6, and based on the fact that she's 14th in her class, this is a student that I'm not worried about her academic preparation for our school. And that's where rank can be helpful if we have it. Is, there's some schools where this many B's would be pretty unusual and not a great sign. But clearly this is a school where this is a very normal, this is a really good transcript to be still so highly ranked in her class. And what I hope this also shows you is I actually spent, a lot of transcripts, as I was saying, are even harder to read. I spend a lot of time staring at transcripts. I don't just look at a GPA, make assumption about what that means, and then move on. I look at the transcript to see What are the trajectory? What does course selection look like? Are there any trends to notice? Things like that. And then there are a couple more documents. We might get a school profile, we'll get teacher recommendations, things like that. But in the interest of time, I want to make sure to leave a couple more minutes for questions. And so while you're typing out any last questions you might have, what I want to say about this student is this is a student where I'm not worried about her academic preparation for our college. I think she'd have a lot to contribute. So in the first round of application review, I would probably vote, yes, I think we should admit this student. And my second reader might vote that as well. Although my second reader might also say, but I don't know, the ACT score is below our usual. And then we would get to what's called committee. And many schools will have some sort of process where files, at least where files where people have slight disagreements, go before a whole group of counselors, and we talk about them. We talk about, who's the student, what do we know about them, should we admit them or should we not admit them right now? And so this is a student where that debate might be about, it might be about a test score, or it might be about, I don't know, that C in chemistry, if we've got one stickler on the committee. It might be about any number of things. It might be about, well, what does she want to study? We're really looking for bio right now. We would have that debate, and it might be that we would all say we should admit Rachel, and then later, sometimes what happens is we vote to admit more students than we have room for. And so then we have to start saying, oh, okay, of all of these students, which ones are we going to say yes to right now, and which ones might we place on the wait list? So we would go through a process to arrive at a class of students that has the diversity that we're looking for, of all kinds, everything from intended major to background. And so even if, even students that we really like, that we want to admit, we don't get to admit all of them. It's one of the sad things about this work. But what I do hope you can take with you as you go forward and work on your own applications is that we spend a lot of time getting to know you. We spend a lot of time thinking about what you've experienced, how you've dealt with challenge, how you've thrived in your current settings, and the places where you still have to grow, and imagining how you might do that at our colleges. And so the best thing you can do is, just really take some care in all of the parts of your application to make sure, and kind of think not just from the first person, think both, what do I want to say? And then think from the third person of, as a reader, what does this say about me? And is it saying the things that I think a college should know? So we've got a couple questions for the last few minutes. Any special advice for a student with a narrative transcript? I would say, I think when you have a narrative transcript, it's the job of your school to give us the information we need to understand how your narrative transcript works. I've worked with narrative transcript schools before. I generally find that schools that have been doing it for a while are usually pretty good at it. So I don't think you need to do anything extra or special. However, if you want to talk a little bit about your school, and maybe, usually if you're at a narrative school, you opted into it. It's not the local public school. It is interesting to know why students choose the schools that they choose. So if you feel like talking about it, that could be a great use of the additional information section. Can you talk a little bit about test scores, not having them, and how to, let's see, how basically to submit or not to submit test scores? It's a little bit challenging because my school, Reed, is actually going test blind this year. We're actually not using test scores at all in our evaluation of students. But I would say if you really don't feel like your first score was solid, doesn't represent your abilities, then I don't think you need to submit it. You can absolutely, there's a COVID section this year in the initial, in the application, where you can talk about how COVID affected you, and you can talk about, I wasn't able to retake the SAT or ACT or whatnot. And I think all schools this year are just going to be doing their best to be really understanding. And we'll be leaning a little bit more on transcripts and on letters from your teachers and things like that. Anything that can give us more information about your academic preparation. So just make sure that you're asking teachers who are going to be able to tell a great story about you as a student. But you can also contact the individual schools that you're looking at, because schools will be doing test optional differently this year from each other. What not to write about in your essay. Anything I say don't write about, I've probably read a good example where someone broke that rule. But I think the essays that are the least successful for me are either ones where a student is really, really down on themselves, because like it or not, you are writing this essay to sort of help us understand what's cool about you. Like you want us to be excited about you. And so I've read essays where students are just like, I'm the worst, and here's all the reasons why. And it's just like, man, I want to root for you, but you're not making it easy here. I also have to say, as a grown adult, we know students have romantic lives, but we prefer not to learn about their romantic lives too much. And the final thing I'll say is, if you're going to write about someone else, maybe a grandparent or someone who's really influential in your life, you can absolutely do that. Just make sure that you're always bringing it back to who you are, relating that story about that other person to your values, your experience, what you learned from them. I know I'm running up on time, but that's kind of an overarching thing, is make sure that your essay is telling us about you, about what matters to you, about what you're like, what you care about. And no matter your topic, so long as you're doing that, I think your essay will serve you well. Russ, are we at time?
We are indeed at time.
All righty. Alexandra, this will take 2 seconds. Each college will be asking for a different number of recs, but it's standard to ask for 2 letters of recommendation from academic teachers. If other colleges want more, you'll see that on their sites or even within the Common App. But thanks a lot. If you want to, oh, here, I'll stop sharing my screen so we can stop looking at school profile. If you want to learn more, you can email admission@reed.edu. Any of our admission counselors are always happy to talk about this kind of thing. Otherwise, thanks for spending the morning with me.
Thank you very much for all of that great information, and thank you to everyone for attending. When you close this window, there will be a link to a very quick 4-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback you can provide. This is just one of many sessions being hosted. Be sure to sign up for additional sessions where you signed up for this one. And in about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording as well as all of the other session recordings. Again, we want to thank Grace for presenting today and sharing all that great information. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
Bye, everyone.